The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for clinical mental health treatment. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988 or head to your nearest emergency room.
Welcome to the Black People Die by Suicide 2 podcast, where we discuss all things mental health with an emphasis on suicide in the Black community. I'm your co host, Jordan.
And I'm your co host, Kia.
So, on the last episode, we got into an introduction, why we want to do this podcast, gave you all a little bit of our backstory, as we are both people who are living with a mental health disorder. And today, we're going to talk about really why we really want to get into this. It makes me think about RuPaul because he always says, "Why I gotta be black?" And why we want to talk about this in the Black community specifically. But first, before we get into that, we're gonna do a check-in. How we're doing? T-Kea, how you doing?
How am I doing? I'm doing great, actually. I am excited about all that's in the works. I'm probably most excited about the podcast because it's video. So, and it's something that I've never done. I always thought, like, yeah, no, I don't want to do video, but I'm excited to do it and just really like connect with other people. Um, I'm excited about my business. Excited about the opportunities that are coming my way. And I think I'm most proud of myself is because I've been pushing past fear and anxiety. Like, I've been, like, when you start having the thoughts like, what if it fails? Or how long is it going to take for people to find us? Or like all of those things. And I'm proud of myself for getting out of my way and still pushing forward and pursuing things that make me happy.
Nice.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I feel a bit of anxiety, but like anxiety in a good way, like in a healthy way, because it's natural for us to experience some anxiety. And I guess it's just about, starting something new with the podcast and I don't know, it's more of an excited anxiety than anything. But personally, I'm doing pretty well too. I've really been trying to incorporate some healthier things into my lifestyle. So I've been eating better, I've been drinking more water. Because our minds and our bodies are all interconnected and you can't have one be healthy without the other. So, yeah, I'm just trying to, get healthy. I'm excited. I have something really to look forward to with the podcast and, getting this off the ground.
Yes. So we're gonna jumping into today's topic.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. So, why I got to be black? In the words of RuPaul. So we wanted to talk about specifically, like, why not just mental health in the Black community, but also suicide? And I think one of the first things that kind of come to mind as Black people when we hear suicide is that's a white person's problem.
Mhm.
Like, only white people commit suicide. There's a problem with the word commit. We'll get into that, but
Right.
only white people commit suicide. And that's simply not true. And we know that. Um, Not to jump ahead, but as part of our podcast, we get into a spotlight about someone that has passed away from suicide or someone that has survived suicide or suicide's a part of their story. And recently, in December, right before the new year, we lost Stephen Twitch, um, as everyone knows him. Stephen Boss from the Ellen DeGeneres show. He was the DJ, dancer, and he was also on So You Think You Can Dance. And I feel like that kind of really brought the conversation of suicide up amongst the Black community. I noticed online, like, people were talking about it and kind of in shock that he had passed away, given like his social media content, and he appeared to be really happy. And um, it does happen to us.
Mhm. I would agree, and I don't think that's jumping ahead, but um, it's because like I remember hearing that growing up. because I was 11. I was in middle school when I started struggling with suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine, and I didn't get help for it until like my early 20s. So that's over 10 years. Like, imagine having cancer for over 10 years. You would actually be dead without treatment.
Right. Right.
So internally, I felt dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I feel like it's important that we talk about it, because I even remember when I came out of the hospital in 2016 from my attempt, my cousin meant well, but I remember, I guess I never told him that I attempted, because at that point I was still very sensitive and I wasn't sharing. But I'm assuming my mom or someone in the family told him, and I remember we were in the car having a conversation, and he was like, "That's a white people thing." He was like, "Only white people do that," and I didn't have as much knowledge and as much courage as I have now to educate him in that moment.
Right.
And it's so important because that we talk about it specifically in the Black community, because we really need to dismantle that stigma that only white people are attempting suicide. And even I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about like the book that you're reading, and we felt like we will dive into it more on a future episode, but I feel like it's relevant.
Yes, so I'm reading a book. The title of it eludes me, unfortunately, at this time. But I will definitely look it up. It's about suicide and slavery. And from what I've read so far, it was talking about suicide being a means of almost like reclaiming their their power and their autonomy over themselves. Slaves, I mean, in uh, you know, during that time. And I'm very excited to continue reading it, to get a better perspective, because you hear all the time. One of the first things I heard for sure was that, girl, you're black. Like, we were slaves. You didn't see slaves die by suicide. Like, you didn't see, well, they used the word commit. You don't see slaves committing suicide. Like, if we could get through that, we could get through anything. And in fact, that's not true. And that's what the book is talking about. And it kind of goes into like the anecdote about, different stories that the author had collected about, individuals who had died by suicide in slavery. And it was actually a very common act, not only of rebellion, so to speak, but literally of like reclaiming your autonomy over your body and your choice to live life on your terms. So yeah, that's not true. Don't let anybody tell you that. Um, and I
Yeah.
think too, it kind of goes into the idea of black people having this like superhuman strength, almost like the expectation that
Right.
we can bounce back from anything, that we don't stop to feel anything. We just always keep it pushing, grind mode, go, go, go. And in a lot of ways, it takes away like our humanity, because we are people and we do feel things.
Yeah, and the thing is, kind of going back to having the expectation we talked about, like you're superhuman. And what we don't realize is when we do that, you're dismissing a person's experience, you're invalidating their feelings. And in order for people to feel safe, understood, and heard, is if you have empathy.
Right.
So if you tell someone, if you're struggling and you have, you need some encouragement, and they come to you and they say, "I'm feeling depressed," or "I'm suicidal," and your response is, "Well, slaves had it worse," or "Somebody else has it worse than you,"
Mm.
or "I have it worse than you." Like, that really defeats the purpose, and then it forces people to not share, and then they suffer
Right.
in silence, and they say, "Oh, well, I told them to come and talk to me." Like, and I feel like that's another reason when we, in a future episode, we'll talk about like how to listen non-judgmentally and interjecting what your views are, when sometimes people, they just need a safe space to be heard, to feel understood, to be validated. They don't need, your advice, and just really being there to provide that support. And when we're talking about suicide specifically, it's important that, we're being there to just simply listen.
Right.
And it's so invalidating when we have people that are just saying things like, "Oh, well, you going through divorce, or your boyfriend or your wife or whatever, they broke up with you and you want to kill yourself. Like, that's dumb. I don't see why you would want to do that." Well, you wouldn't do that, but that's not the same thing as the other person.
Right.
So I feel like that's another reason why we felt like it's so important to have this topic. And then talking about like two things can coexist, or
Mm-hmm.
and kind of talking a little bit about like duality in terms of you can be grateful, but you can also still be struggling with depression.
Right.
You can have great things going on in your life and still, because sometimes when you're talking about depression, sometimes people, it could be just a chemical imbalance. Sometimes you don't have to have a death of a loved one or
Right.
financial issues or relationship issues. Sometimes it just simply is a chemical imbalance. And so you can be going through all of those things and or have everything going right but still feel depressed. Or if you are, feeling suicidal, like that's okay too. It's a matter of like what are you going to do, or how are you going to help someone get out of that space. And it's okay. Again, you can be grateful and still struggling with your mental health at the same time. So it's important that we stop invalidating people's experiences as Black people and comparing everything to slavery. Just because we aren't slaves, that doesn't mean that what we're currently going through is not valid.
Right. And I think, along with duality, it's important to keep in mind that, yes, wealthy people experience suicidal thoughts. People that are, like you mentioned earlier, people that are successful, people who seem to have it all together. Um, we experience suicidal thoughts. We are people. We're human. We have a range of emotions. We're not always good. Which again kind of goes back to the first episode when we were saying that we automatically say we're fine, we're good. We're not always good. And it goes back to what you said, invalidating people's experience. So what? So for instance, take myself. By all accounts, I should have never had a mental health disorder. Why? Well, I grew up in a two-parent household. We were middle class. My brother and I never grew up without food or without, electricity, none of those things. And that's also been said to me like, girl, what do you have to be depressed about? Like, you're not hungry, you're not cold, you're not. And it's like, really? Like, I still had things happen to me that, wound up, I developed a mental health disorder because of them. And I've definitely experienced a lot of dismissive comments that were really hurtful to me and made me kind of turn off from wanting to and talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, I just kind of figured those were ended up being people that I really couldn't have those discussions with. Which is why I think it's important for us to build community, because you won't you may not automatically get it from the people that are closest to you. Sometimes they can actually be the most hurtful, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree. And I think for us, it's a matter of having this discussion to create a safe space
Right.
and to let people know that they're not alone. It is okay to experience suicidal ideation. And this is a whole nother topic, but I still feel like we have to talk about it a little bit. It's okay to have those thoughts. And when you want to talk about people who identify as a Christian or any sort of religion, then that's where it gets tricky, because then people feel like I've heard you're going to go to hell, or that means you lack faith in God, or and that is dismissive and hurtful too.
Right. Right.
Not because you wouldn't say that to someone who said they had a heart attack or they had diabetes.
Right.
You're going to go to hell if you die because you had diabetes or cancer or a heart attack or asthma. And that goes to show how we treat a physical health condition versus a mental health condition,
Right.
which is not fair. And so telling people that they're going to go to hell or they somehow lack faith in their higher being only isolates them,
Right.
contributes to the stigma, and then makes them feel like they don't have a safe space to talk. So I don't know if there's something you wanted to add to that.
And I think too that it's important to bear in mind that with recovery, especially for people with co-occurring disorders, but for recovery in general.
You gotta tell them just in case they don't know what
Oh, I'm
co-occurring is.
sorry. Yes. Let me go back. So, as mentioned in the first episode, co-occurring disorders are is experienced by someone who has a mental health diagnosis and a diagnosis of substance use disorder, which just means that someone is using alcohol or any other substance in a way that is detrimental. That's important to note because there are people who, drink alcohol casually and it doesn't really bother them and it doesn't create a problem for them. But um, when it starts to affect their health and their responsibilities, that's when it kind of transitions over into substance use disorder. So that's what a co occurring disorder is. It's important to keep in mind that for these individuals specifically, there's a lot of different paths to treatment. And no path is a wrong path. A lot of times people will, pursue lots of different things, whether that be church, whether that be 12 step meetings, whether that be, 12 step meetings are like your Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, etc. There's also some 12 step meetings for mental health, like Emotions Anonymous. There's Celebrate Recovery, which is the Christian version of 12 step meetings. I mean, there's NAMI meetings, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. There's DBSA meetings, the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. Um, there's a lot of different paths to treatment. I don't think that it's fair to say to someone, oh, well, you're experiencing a mental health disorder or you're feeling how you feel, you're feeling suicidal because you lack faith in God or, you should just go to church and pray about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that church or prayer is a bad thing. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is it shouldn't be weaponized against people, I guess. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I had shared with you how I was on social media and I saw a caption that says suppressing something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, but suppressing your mental health challenges or disorder as a praise break is not helpful. Like I could identify with that because that was me for a few years. And it's like you find yourself you shouting in church every single Sunday and you crying and you rolling all over the floor. And that's not to say things don't work spiritually because I do believe that spirituality has a place in terms of mental health and
Oh,
helping
yeah.
people get better.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you're finding that you're shouting every Sunday and you're praying 50,000 times a day and you're still struggling with your mental health, like it may be time to consider to see a therapist or a psychiatrist or start with your primary care physician. Like there that means that it's an indication that what you're doing is not currently working and it means that you can have both. You can pray and be on medication at the same time. You can pray and be in therapy at the same time. Like you know, people who are of a certain faith, I'm just going to say Christian just because that's just how I grew up, but they're not really trained to handle mental health challenges. Now, granted, there are some mental health professionals who are clinically trained to develop a treatment
Right.
plan to help you address the trauma.
Right.
But when you're talking about a pastor or a bishop, someone in the church, like a lot of them are not trained in terms of mental health. And so they could be doing sometimes, and they have done more damage or more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone who's experienced church trauma. Like I was told, like you need to speak in tongues for 20 minutes a day, and your depression's gonna go away. Excuse me. First of all, I don't even know how to speak in tongues. That's not a gift that God has given me at least as of today.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I can't do that. I can pray, and if you saying you need to pray, you need to pray harder. One, that means you're assuming that I'm not praying,
That
and
is
two, what does
correct.
praying harder even mean?
Right.
So now you're attacking my faith while I'm already struggling.
Right.
So that pushed me away from the church, and it's like at that point I was like, I am not. I didn't want to have anything to do with the church
Mhm.
at all. I didn't want to listen to gospel music. Like I was so hurt, like so traumatized from the experience that I had. And those people meant well. They did mean
Yep.
well. They loved me, they cared about me, but they just didn't have the knowledge. And being really traumatized for a long time, I did not step foot in the church.
Mm.
I was like, don't play gospel music. Don't tell me you praying for me. Don't pray for me. Like I was just so like, and I still have some church trauma that I'm working through. But like I can go back into church now. Like I can listen to gospel music, but there's still some soft spots. And a lot of times you find people who are struggling with suicidal thoughts or whatever they might be going through, and they're in the church and they find that they're shouting every single Sunday, they praying, they're speaking in tongues, they doing all of the things in the spiritual, but they won't even touch the things in the natural. And you like, yes, God has the power to heal you if you believe in God.
Right. Right.
Yes, he has the power to heal you, but what if God is saying, I need you to go see a therapist?
Right.
Because you're quick to probably go see a doctor if you have issues with
Something wrong.
diabetes
Right.
or you have some sort of autoimmune condition, like where you're more inclined. You don't
Right.
put up, oh, I need to just pray. Yeah, you're probably gonna say I'm gonna pray, but I'm still gonna take my insulin for
Mm.
my diabetes.
Mm.
You're still going to do that. So that's why it's important that mental health is definitely talked about in the church, because the church has its place, but the church has a history of doing more harm than good in terms of mental health. And while I feel like we're getting along, because we're coming a long way, because there are churches who are talking about mental health, there are churches who host mental health events, who have
Right.
mental health ministries, but there's still some ways that we need to go. And I just want to make sure that it's important to let people know that we have to really stop telling people that they're going to go to hell, if just for having the thoughts,
Yes.
or if they attempt.
Yes. So this was definitely one of the first things that I heard when I, initially experienced my, mental health crisis. Um, those three things for sure. Black people were slaves, so they don't understand what I had to be depressed about. Um, did you pray? Have you gone to church recently? Or only white people die by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And telling everybody that you don't believe in God enough is why you're experiencing what's causing you so much pain. It's not the right way to go about things. You know what I mean? It's not a helpful way to help someone um, get into treatment or seek help. You know what I mean? I think, like you said, people will have like negative experiences that will turn you away from going to church. And
Right. And then you don't go to church, and then you won't go to therapy, and then you
right,
won't take your medication,
right,
and then there aren't any supports in place.
right,
And then now you're out here trying to fend for yourself, because when you did reach out, you got responses like that.
right.
And you were already struggling. A person could have already been praying, but then someone in the church told them don't go to therapy, and then, or don't take the medication.
Yep.
Like people told me, like, don't take that medication, it's gonna make you feel, worse. Now, granted,
Yes.
I do believe in holistic healing, but Western medicine also has its place as well. And
Absolutely.
so I ideally, like, my goal is, in terms of taking medication for bipolar disorder, like I would like to get to a point where I don't need my medication.
Mhm.
But if I should need it for the rest of my life, then I need it for the rest of my life. But I would like to have a period in my life to try it, to see if I can, if I, if my coping skills are just enough.
Mhm.
But it's okay. Every person with bipolar disorder doesn't need medication.
Right.
And so I just think, just making sure that when we're having these conversations about mental health and suicide, that experiences vary from person to person. There are some people who can manage their mental health with all holistic approaches. There are some people who need a mixture of holistic and Western. There are some people who are just Western. There are some people who who do believe in God and they incorporate their faith into their recovery. There are people who don't believe in God. And you talk about there's different ways to
Yes.
healing and treatment.
Yes.
And so just because what works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for the other
Yes.
person. And so that's why when Jordan, I feel like with us being peer support specialists, we have that knowledge in terms of we know when it's appropriate to kind of like share our story when we're working with peers, but we also still respect where they are.
Right.
We're not trained to tell people what they should do. They may ask for advice, we may help them lay out just different options, but it's never you should pray or you need to believe in God.
Right.
Like those should, could, need, like all of those things, those are not helpful. They actually deter people. And so it's important that you don't, when someone's reaching out to you, even if you don't have any knowledge or experience up in terms of living with the mental health diagnosis, that you make sure that you are not projecting your own stuff. But then it's even hard for people to do that because there are some people who don't have a level of self-awareness.
Right. It's very dismissive to say that to someone, especially when they actually had the courage to approach you of all people to talk about this with. Like, um,
Yeah.
shouldn't be dismissing folks. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah, I would agree. And I would add that kind of going back to because you was like, yeah, I know you support like you wrote commit type thing, but just telling people like if not just it's one thing to have this information and to know it's another thing to share it.
right.
So if you hear somebody saying, "Oh, I tried to commit," even if they say, "I tried to commit suicide," or this person commit, just make sure like, "Oh, well, I've learned," or share this podcast episode with them. Um, and to each his own. Like I remember I had posted a video on Instagram, and I was saying why we don't say committed suicide. And I'm connected to a lot of therapists, and one of the therapists had commented and said that one of her clients was offended, or I guess like upset that they preferred to use the word committed, which was like,
Okay.
so I think it really depends on the person and what works for them. But I just know, like being in the mental health field, we're working really hard to not define people based on their diagnosis or based on a decision that they've made that may have been detrimental to their life. We want to make sure that we're viewing people as people and not their diagnosis or their choice.
Yeah. So in recovery, we call this like person centered or person first language. Where people will, before we're anything else. We're not, oh, that person's bipolar. Or, oh, she's bipolar. She's a person that has bipolar disorder. Or she's depressed. That's a person that's living with depression. So, it's part of reclaiming our humanity like we talked about earlier.
Reclaiming my time.
Yes. Sister Maxine Waters, thank you.
Right. Reclaiming my time.
Yes.
And I think even down to like autism, I know I still hear some people say like that child is autistic.
Yeah.
And that's giving them identity based upon like we don't walk around be like the person got asthma, like that's asthma, that's diabetes, that's cancer,
Right.
that's heart disease. Like we don't walk around doing that with physical illnesses. So I know like now we're trying to say like that individual, like they live with autism or they may be on the spectrum, but saying they're autistic is literally just saying all you are, you're just your diagnosis.
Right. Yeah, it's those labels, man. It's we shouldn't put labels on people like that. You know what I mean? Because we're so much more. We're multifaceted. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think another thing we want to really speak to is like we're going to have an entire episode on this, so we don't have to get too into the weeds, but just like Black children and suicide, and the rate for Black children dying by suicide has literally skyrocketed. I think it says it is the second leading cause of death. So we're like, this is another reason why we have to talk about it's not just a white thing, because it's impacting our kids at an alarming rate. And so there are a lot of parents who are like, I have a friend, her daughter had wrote a suicide letter, and my friend, of course, impacting her daughter is, she's either 10 or she might be like 9 or 10. And so that's like, imagine what do you do if your kid, comes to you and say that, or you find something, see something on social media or a text message, what are you doing in that moment? And then just thinking to yourself like, oh, it'll never happen to my child, or it's, or thinking only white kids do that. Like that's, we talked about invalidating
Yeah.
people's experience, and stop dismissing when a child is coming to you and saying that they have an issue about something. Because I feel like growing up, I think, I don't know if my mom did this to me, but I actually see, I've watched it experience among like other parents, where they'll be like, or just adults in general, like, what do you have to be depressed about, like as a kid? Or talk to me when you grow up and you have
You
bills,
got bills.
and you got all of this.
Yeah.
And it's like, just because, but as children they're big problems to us, because
Right.
that's all of the world that we know.
Right.
As children, no, as children we don't know what it's like to be in debt or to pay bills. And so that's, we haven't gotten there yet.
Right.
And so it's important that when we're talking about children, that we do not invalidate their experiences just because they're 4 or they're 5. There have been 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year olds who have died by suicide. And you thinking, oh, why would they do that? They don't have much. Some of it could be bullying. Another stuff could be trauma.
Right.
But the most important thing is that we do not dismiss children when they're coming to us with a problem.
Yeah, I think suicide as it pertains to kids, like, it's kind of, if you think about a teenager and they have their first love and they break up, and teenagers are hormonal and they're moody anyway, but the idea of it being like the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and we think that's so dramatic as adults, but that's probably literally the worst thing that's happened to them. Why? They haven't had enough life experience to challenge that. They haven't, this is their first breakup. They haven't broken up and gotten with someone else. They don't know that there's I guess light at the end of the tunnel, because they haven't had experienced enough of life to actually challenge that like we have. So I think we shouldn't be so dismissive of our children when they come to us with problems, or saying that they have pain, or kind of like you said, because I definitely heard that, girl, what you got to be depressed about?
Right.
Girl, you got a roof over your head, I pay for your bills. Yeah, like, children are people with their own lives. They're not just an extension of us. They literally have their own little lives going on. They have their school stuff, their friend group, the other kids they may be beefing with. They have a whole life outside of us. I'm not a parent. You're not a parent either, but they have lives outside of their parents and outside of their, nuclear family. We shouldn't be so dismissive. Maybe that is the worst thing that's ever happened to them, because there's nothing, they haven't lived long enough to have anything challenge that. So
Yeah, and when you talk about, and then you turn around and you say something like that, what do you have to be depressed about? Like, I got a roof over your head, but then when they don't come to you, well, why didn't you come to me? Because when they came to you, you invalidated their
you
experiences.
can't have it both ways.
Right. Pick your poison. You either want them to come to you or you don't want them to come to you. So that's another reason we're going to have an entire episode dedicated to the rise of suicide among Black children.
Yes.
So make sure y'all stay tuned for that. And I'm so excited about that episode, because the person who's coming, I have she and I have met through mental health work that we've done. So I'm excited. And then Jordan, we kind of already talked about it a bit, but we could just still kind of go back just to say like our because we were highlighting Twitch.
Right.
So yes, we talked about him, but he is our spotlight for this episode, because we want to honor him, the life that he lived, the legacy that he left, honor his family, honor his children, because we want to make sure, we're talking about that Black men and suicide, which is a whole nother area. We're all Black, but when you talk about children, women, and then you talk about LGBT Black, like we all have our own different experiences within the Black community. And so it was very, like, I remember when I saw the news, like I really wasn't like a huge, like I knew who he was, but I wasn't like I guess like a diehard fan, or I just kind of really didn't pay attention to much that what he was doing. Like I knew he was the DJ, but I didn't know like the ins and out of his life, like I know about like Lizzo or something.
Right. Oh gosh, she loves Lizzo, you guys.
Well, I don't know the ins and out of her life, but I know a lot about her.
Right.
But so I really wasn't sure, and I just remember I got a notification on Twitter,
Mm.
and I was like, I think I may have sent it to you,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just like, oh my gosh, and I was on the phone with my mom, and like it like really like set. I just kind of felt like something heavy on my chest, and I remember telling my therapist, I'm like, his death is really bothering me, and I feel like it impacted me or it impacts me is because I know what it's like to be in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just fortunate enough where my life was spared.
Right.
That's the only difference, because I could have had a different outcome.
Right.
And so that's why I'm like, wow, I know what it's like to sit in that and go through with the plan, and feeling like the only relief I have. It's not a lot of times that people want to die. I can't speak for Twitch because I'm not him, but it's not a lot of times that we want to die. It's more so I want to get rid of the pain.
Yes.
The mental pain and anguish that you feel, you want that to go.
Right.
And so may he rest in peace,
Yes.
and may his family eventually find some comfort and hope. But I know that's probably a very long journey to get there, because it's not easy. It's a lot of questions, I'm pretty sure, that his family has.
And I think too, kind of why it hit people so hard is that he made like those, videos of himself dancing with his family, and it brought people such joy, and it kind of asks, begs the question, oh my gosh, how could he? He appeared to be so happy.
Mhm.
Well, let me tell you, those of us who have wrestled with suicidal thoughts, or have made like attempts and lived to tell the tale, we are wonderful at hiding our depression and how we're feeling. And I know that was one of the things that really caught people off guard, because he made those happy videos, with his family, or happy seeming videos with his family. And just thought I should bring awareness to that, because I feel like people always say, oh, they look so happy on their social media, but we see people at their best on social media, not necessarily what's, really going on with them.
Exactly. And that's why. Wait, I'm sorry. Were you done?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay. And that's why on social media I comment. I post the transparent moments. It's not me out here. People may view it as like airing dirty laundry. I'm not airing any dirty laundry. There are some things that I do keep to myself, but in terms of my mental health journey and some of the trauma that I faced, I share it because one, it's very free and liberating, because now I own it. You can't use anything against me.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, it helps other people feel like they aren't alone. So I will post, write a Facebook post, or put a video on Instagram and saying like, this is what I've been dealing with, and it's not a matter of I don't need pity or anything, but there's other people need to be like, wow, there's someone else, like me. So it's important that I feel like we see that on social media. And that doesn't mean that a person, if you're listening to the podcast, that you have to go out and write a Facebook post or post a video on Instagram about your
Right.
One, because that's another thing, you want to make sure you're ready to share, because
Right.
you may not be in a place where you're ready to share.
Oh, yeah.
Because I wasn't always ready to share. But it's most important that you're vulnerable. You have people in your life. You don't have to share that on social media, but you want to at least have people in real life that you can be vulnerable with. I just so happen to be where I'm vulnerable in person and online, but just kind of figure out what works for you in sharing your truth, and have at least one person that you can share your truth with.
Yeah, agreed.
So we're gonna get to what's our next segment. So we have
resource.
Our resource. You want?
Yeah, sure. So we're gonna draw attention to for our resource segment.
Even though you shared tons of resources.
Oh my gosh, I did. We'll get into that later. I was talking about like the NAMI meetings and DBSA meetings earlier. But the one we want to talk about today is one that kicked off last year, and that is the 988. It's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And it's a wonderful resource. You can call them if you're experiencing, a mental health crisis, or you, need someone to talk to, need some assistance. You can just dial 988. It's that simple now. It's kind of like 911. If you're having, an emergency with your mental health, you can dial 988, and you can be connected with someone who is trained to, assess you, see how things are going, where you may be at in terms of treatment. And I'm pretty sure they give you like, different resources and things that you can do in the community.
Mhm. And I'm not sure for we have to share our moment of inspiration.
Yes.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
You want to do Amy
I'm
Bleuel?
doing Amy. Okay, yes. So, Amy Bleuel. Is it Bleuel?
Blue. I'm sorry, Blue.
Amy Bleuel. So she is the founder of the Semicolon Project. And so a semicolon is used when an author could have chosen to end their sentence, but they chose not to. So the author is you and the semicolon is your life. P.S. Your story isn't over. And so that's why you often see a lot of people, you may see them with the semicolon tattoo. Like I have one because it brings awareness to it. And unfortunately, Amy, in the midst of what she was going through and creating this amazing organization, she died by suicide. And I'm so um, appreciative that I had a small window where I got to engage with her. I was doing a blog, an anonymous blog. It was joygreen.com because I didn't want anybody to know T-Kea was struggling. And I had interviewed her and posted the interview on my blog. It was, of course, in written form, but and when I found out, I was just like, oh my gosh, I just had talked to her. And it's like, in the midst of all that she had going through, she still, was a warrior and still fighting for her life, but then also still bringing awareness to other people to, let them know that they aren't alone. And so I would definitely encourage you to check out, it is the semicolonproject.com. They have resources, tons of resources, and we'll make sure that all of the resources that we've mentioned here, that they will be located in the description box on YouTube as well as on wherever you listen to your podcast. You'll be able to have all of those resources.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Nope.
Well, thank you for listening to our second
Yeah.
or whatever number episode this might be. I'm not sure.
Right.
Episode of Black People Die. Thank you for listening to another episode of Black People Die by Suicide 2 podcast. This episode was sponsored by the Mental Health Empowerment Agency, where its mission is to dismantle the mental health stigma and raise awareness of suicide prevention through curated events, individual and group peer support, digital and social media, and educational trainings.